Conspiracy. Noun. A secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. The action of plotting or conspiring. Coincidence. Noun. A remarkable occurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection. Correspondence in nature or in time of occurrence. Cover-up. Verb. Put something on top of or in front of something in order to protect or conceal it. Try to hide the fact of illegal or illicit activity. The truth is hidden behind the veil. Stay awake. Stay aware. Nothing is ever what it seems.
Indeed, nothing is ever as it seems. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on which of the 24/25 time zones you are listening to this show from. We will enter the matrix of the mind tonight here on WCAK 1124 AM as we head into the dark zone, where we tune into the unknown, the unexplained, and the utterly unnerving. Tonight marks the second episode of Conspiracy, Coincidence, or Cover-Up. We'll dissect phenomena that blur the lines between reality and nightmare, leaving you to decide what's lurking beneath the surface. On tonight's dive, Jack the Ripper. You are invited, but listener discretion is advised. This is sheer terror. This is statistics that scream. This is enlightenment that burns. We'll hit the conspiracy in angle one. A surgeon's blade? A royal scandal? A prince's secret child? Sir William Gull, physician to the crown, carving out the truth? One uterus at a time? Carriages without crests? Freemason symbols scrubbed from the brick? Establishment didn't just look away. They orchestrated. And then we'll hit angle two, the coincidence. Or maybe it's not a plot at all. A city of 80,000 drunk on gin, 1,200 prostitutes in Whitechapel alone? Well, one predator with a 6-inch knife and perfect timing. 5 murders in 10 weeks? Statistically inevitable, when poverty may be the real killer. We'll hit cover-up section, where files vanished, witnesses forgot. The chalked message, the Jews are the men that are not to be blamed for nothing, erased by the order of Sir Charles Warren himself. Why? Because the truth was worse than the legend. And then we will close the show out, as we always will, with a paranormal angle. What if the knife never left? What if the fog is the killer? Coiling, concise, eternal. Witnesses saw shadows detach. Letters written in blood that we know wasn't human. Graves that breathe. In the closing segment, we will cross the veil. Bring a lantern. Bring a prayer. Bring everything you think you know about the dead. You're locked in. The signal is alive. We will be back right after this break. You are in the dark zone. WCAK 1124 AM. I am your host, Sal Rock.
London, 1888. The streets run cold, and in a small bakery off Whitechapel Road, something sweet was stirring. They called them Oasis cherry pies, golden crust, ruby filling, rich as sin. But locals whispered that fillings weren't just cherries. Coincidence, or a cover-up baked into every pie. Some say Jack the Ripper himself had a favorite bakery, that after each encounter, he stopped in for something warm, red, and fresh from the oven. A ritual of indulgence, a secret recipe that disappeared, along with the killer. Well, now, Oasis cherry pies are back. Same old recipe, same deep ruby hue. Take a bite and decide for yourself. Is it just dessert? Or something darker, rising beneath the crust? Oasis cherry pies. So good. It's almost criminal. And remember to make Oasis your basis for life.
Welcome back to WCAK 1124 AM. We are here, conspiracy, coincidence, or cover-up. Tonight, we're deep diving on Jack the Ripper. In our first segment, conspiracy angle. Let's take a walk tonight. Not a stroll, not a sightseeing jaunt for the curious tourist. No, we're going down Whitechapel Way, the east end of London. The year of our Lord, 1888, where the alleys were blackened with soot, piss, gin vomit, and the steam of overworked horses, where the city looked like it was rotting inward, like a corpse left too long in the July sun. But it's not the rot of garbage we're concerned with tonight. We're here for the other rot, the rot of power, the rot of success, the rot of men who could get away with anything. And at the center of that rot, somewhere behind the fog, is the figure they call Jack the Ripper. But let me tell you something before we go one step further. That name, it was never meant for the killer. No, that name was crafted. It was rolled out. It was printed and distributed like a brand of gin or a new line of soap. Because the Ripper wasn't just a killer. He was a message. And messages like that don't come from lonely madmen. They come from people who need to be heard, but never seen. Let's begin with the body, because that's where everything actually begins. Mary Ann Nichols, Polly, they called her. She was found on Bucks Row, August 31st, 1888. Face up, skirt thrown over her waist, throat cut twice, deep, almost decapitated. The knife went left to right, deliberate, controlled, abdomen slashed open, guts showing like someone had unzipped their core to take a look inside. There was no frenzy, no flailing stabs, no scratches or cuts on her forearm, which means she didn't fight back. She never had a chance. This was not a drunken swing. This was not a man losing control. This was someone who knew where to cut, someone who was calm while doing it, someone who practiced. A butcher? A surgeon? A hunter? Yes, possibly. But here's where the conspiracy begins. Polly Nichols was not the first, not even close. She was the first one they acknowledged, the first that the press was allowed to connect publicly, because the killer, whoever he was, had been active before Polly Nichols. There were mutilations that go back years, missing women, unknown women, silent graves, but those didn't matter, not to the police, and definitely not to the Crown. So why did Polly matter? Because her body, her murder, her display, it was just too loud. Someone wanted eyes. Polly was the announcement. Like the pilot episode, the cold open. Jack the Ripper did not stumble drunk into history. He debuted. Now let's fast forward 5 days. Annie Chapman, found behind 29 Hanbury Street. Her throat was cut so deeply, her head was hanging on by a mere strip of meat. Her abdomen wasn't just opened, organs were removed. And here's the kicker, the one the history books mention briefly, then look away from. The removal was done with skill. The uterus cleanly cut out, not torn, not hacked, cut, in the dark, in an alley, with no formal table, without hesitation. That is trained work. That is the hand of someone who has done internal dissection many times before, which leads us to the first major conspiracy theory. And it is the one London Metropolitan Police themselves flirted with. Jack the Ripper was a doctor. Not a mad vagrant, not a sailor passing through, not a random lunatic, a man of learning, of privilege of access, a man with the means to disappear behind the curtain when the sun came up. But that theory alone is too simple, because if the killer were merely a doctor, if he were simply competent, then he could be caught. Doctors have names, addresses, patients, reputation, licenses. No, this was not just a doctor. This was a doctor protected, a doctor shielded, a doctor who knew that even if someone suspected him, nothing would happen. Not because he was innocent, but because his guilt was inconvenient. And here, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the royal vein running deep through this story. The theory that made the British establishment put its hand on the knife handle and say, "Don't dig here." The theory that says Jack the Ripper was acting to cover up a scandal involving the royal family, and specifically Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, known also by his friends as Eddie, a dull-witted, glassy-eyed aristocrat whose appetites needed to be managed to avoid embarrassment. A prince who was rumored, whispered, gossiped to have had relations with a Whitechapel shop girl, a girl who became pregnant. And girls who know too much talk. And girls who can talk need to be silenced. The theory goes like this. The women murdered were not random sex workers. They were connected. They knew about the prince, or knew someone who did, and when the crown decided the secret had to be erased, they didn't send soldiers. They didn't send guards, police. They didn't send lawyers. They sent a surgeon, a man who could remove secrets, the way a knife removes a uterus, cleanly, completely, irrevocably. But we're not finished, because in this angle, Jack wasn't acting alone. He had handlers. Escorts, lookouts, cabs waiting, safe houses, protection, and most importantly, a guaranteed disappearance. Because when the message was delivered and the loose ends were cut away and the organs were pocketed and the newspapers were screaming, the killer vanished. Just like that. Like a man who knew, "My work is done, gentlemen. You may now begin forgetting." But we don't forget. Not here. Not on conspiracy, coincidence, or cover-up. Not on this night. And so, my dear listeners, let us push deeper into the fog, because this was not the work of a monster. This was the work of a system, and a system that kills is far more frightening than any single man with a knife. Now we peel back the velvet curtain. Not all the way, no. Just enough to see the shadow of the hand that held the knife. Because if the Ripper killings were part of a system, then that system had structure, hierarchy, people who gave orders, people who executed them, people who ensured the city looked away. And when we speak of networks of power in London, 1888, we are speaking of three names: the Crown, the Freemasons, and the London Metropolitan Police. Now, don't misunderstand. We're not saying every cop, not every constable walking his beat with cold hands and stale bread in his pocket. We're talking about the officers who don't walk beats, the ones who give instructions, the one who says, "Tell the press this, say nothing about that, move the body before the reporters arrive." The Ripper case was the first instance in British policing history where the public was deliberately misled in print, in real time, by official instruction. And that tells us something very simple. Somebody was scared. Somebody with enough power to change the story as it unfolded. Let's talk about the Freemasons. Now, this isn't tinfoil. This isn't internet lore. This is documented history. Most of the highest-ranking police officials in London in 1888 were Masons. The city coroner was a Mason. The commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Charles Warren, was not just a Mason, he was a high-ranking officer in the organization. The kind of Mason who doesn't sit quietly in a rented hall above a bakery. The kind who gives orders overseas. And when a murder happens that threatens to expose a scandal involving the crown, well, who do you call? Not the army, not the clergy. You call the network of loyal men who have sworn an oath. My brother's secret is my secret. And then you tell them, bury this. The suspected surgeon, you've heard the name before if you dug deep into the darker shelves of Victorian history. Sir William Gull, royal physician, trusted medical consultant to Queen Victoria, a man who knew anatomy, surgery, dissection, all not just in theory, but with cold, practiced familiarity. But here's the detail most people miss. Sir William Gull had suffered a stroke. He was not supposed to be practicing medicine at the time of the Ripper killings. He was officially retired. But witnesses place him traveling at night in a horse-drawn carriage, accompanied by a man who fits the description of a coachman linked to the royal stables. The name of that coachman? John Netley. Netley is one of those names that keeps showing up where it shouldn't. In back alleys, in witness recollections of dark carriages rolling slowly through Whitechapel, and rumors whispered by the East End long after the killing stopped. Netley was not a man of means. He had no business with royalty. And yet, he was linked, repeatedly, to the Royal Mews. Which brings us to our operating team. Gull, the surgeon, Netley, the driver, and possibly a third man, a minder, a lookout, a protector, whose name is whispered as Sir Robert Anderson, Assistant Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, and a Mason, confidant of government ministers, the man who took sudden leave during the killings and then returned the exact week they ended. Coincidence? Possibly, but we're not done. The message written in blood. There was a note, you know the one every major museum politely skirts around, the one your grade school textbooks ignored, the one that reads, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Scrawled in chalk near a bloodied piece of the victim's apron. Now, the message was wiped away before photographs could be taken. And by whose orders? You guessed it, Sir Charles Warren. He personally ordered the erasure of the writing. Not a junior officer, not a watch sergeant, the commissioner himself. Why would the head of the police rush to destroy potential evidence? Because the writing referenced Masonic lore. The term Jewess appeared in Masonic ritual text, referring to 3 betrayers of the Master Mason, Harim Abith. See, this wasn't anti-Jewish graffiti. It was a signature, a warning, a message from the killer to the people covering him. The message basically said, don't try to pin this on anyone outside the circle. You know who this is for. Warren did not erase the message to prevent riots. He erased the message because it exposed the Masonic connection. You know, the press is a weapon. Now, let's talk branding, because Jack the Ripper is not a serial killer's signature. It's a headline. The letter signed "From Hell," the "Dear Boss" letter, both mailed to the press, both splashed across the front pages, both designed to shape the story. And here's the twist. Handwriting analysis suggests the "Dear Boss" letter was likely written by a journalist, not the killer. A journalist who had access to early police witness statements, which suggests the media didn't just report Jack the Ripper. They manufactured him, turned him into myth, a phantom, a nightmare with a Cleaver signature. And myths, they're useful, because a mythical killer can't be caught. And a killer who can't be caught can't be questioned. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he stopped. No arrest, no body, no trial, no final killing spree, no suicide, no confession, just silence. like a curtain falling after the final act, because the job was done. The women who knew the secret, or were connected to someone who knew, were gone. The scandal was sealed. The message was delivered. And the surgeon, the coachman, the assistant commissioner, they simply returned to normal life. Sir William Gull died a year later, quietly. John Netley died strangely. He was hit by a horse and cart. Well, we've seen that story before, Princess Diana. And Sir Robert Anderson was honored for his service. The only body never located when this dust settled was a body of truth. But we can still smell the iron in the fog. We can still hear the scrape of the blade across the bone. We can still feel the chill of a city that learned some secrets are worth killing for. And some killers don't hide at all because they know we're never going to be allowed to see them. We've established the shadow. Now we look at the people who saw the shadow and were told to forget they saw it. Because contrary to the polite, sanitized version of this story, there were witnesses. Not just one, not just two, a dozen credible accounts, and they all pointed in the same direction. Let's begin with the one nobody likes to talk about. The witness who heard the carriage. Her name was Elizabeth Long. 5:30 a.m., September 8, 1888, Hanbury Street. Damp air, chimney smoke clinging low. She walks past a courtyard. She sees Annie Chapman, still alive at this point, speaking with a man. Not drunk, not desperate, and not manic. They're speaking quietly, like the way two people speak when they already know each other. Elizabeth hears the man's voice. Will you? Not threatening. She describes him as over 40, foreign-looking or upper-class pale, wearing a dark overcoat, and now, pay attention, a top hat. A top hat in Whitechapel? The East End was not a top hat part of town. That's the first tell. But it gets darker, because just moments before Annie was found gutted behind that same house, several residents heard a carriage. A horse, very slow-paced, as if it was waiting, a wheel on wet cobblestone. No shouting, no drunken noise, just quiet, measured, and purposeful. A carriage sitting in the dark is not a drunken killer's escape route. It's a planned export transportation. It's an extraction. It is protection. The witness who saw the knife. Now we come to Catherine Eddowes, the third canonical victim. She was found in Mitre Square, September 30th, 1888. But only minutes before her murder, 3 men saw her with a suspect. Those 3 men were not vagrants. They're not rumor mongers. They're not drunkards. In fact, they were police officers. Constable Watkins, Constable Harvey, and Constable James. 3 trained, all describing a man who did not belong in the slums. They described him well-dressed, leather gloves, a small, precise blade, carrying a black medical-style bag. Now listen to that part again for a second. A black medical bag in the alley at 1:30 in the morning in a district where people died for owning a pair of boots? This man was not hiding. He was operating. And then there was the body who survived. Ah, yes. There was one woman who escaped the mutilation. Her name was Elizabeth Stride, murdered the same night as Catherine Eddowes, but here's the difference. Elizabeth Stride's murder was interrupted, was caught by someone mid-process and had to stop early, and so her body was not mutilated. That's how we know the mutilation wasn't compulsion. It wasn't frenzy. It wasn't purpose. The organs were the point. The cutting was the message. The display was the theater. Stride's death tells us one thing. The killer wasn't killing for the thrill. He was killing to complete a job that required time, a job that required privacy, a job that required darkness and silence, which is why the killings tended to happen during police shift changes. Well, let's let that sink in for a second. Someone knew the patrol schedule. Someone knew where the blind spots were. Someone knew exactly how long they had to work. That, my friends, is inside information. Which leads us to the suppressed police memo. Now, I want you to imagine this. It is November 1888. The city is howling for justice. Newspapers are printing every rumor they can get their hands on. The Home Office is terrified. The Queen is demanding answers. And then a memo is circulated among senior detectives. And this memo says, and I quote, "The killer is believed to be a man of education and social position, not a butcher, not a sailor, not a foreigner, a man of standing, a gentleman." This memo was supposed to guide police strategy. Instead, it was buried. Why, do you ask? Because if the public found out that the Ripper was not an outsider, not a monster from the gutter, but a man who could walk into the palace without question, well, the city would certainly burn. You know, there's one letter that was never meant to be seen. And now we come to the keyhole, the tiny crack in the door where the truth leaks through. In 1967, almost 80 years later, a private researcher uncovered a letter written by Assistant Commissioner Anderson, a letter never intended for publication. And in that letter, he wrote this, a simple sentence: "The truth may never be known, for it would bring into disrepute persons whose position is of the highest." Well, there it is. Plain, clear, and unmistakable. The police knew. They knew who. They knew why. They knew what was at stake. And they chose silence. Not because they couldn't catch the Ripper, but because they weren't allowed to. The Ripper was not a ghost. He was not a phantom. He was not unknowable. He was known. His identity was not lost to time. It was locked away. Because the real fear was never the man cutting the women in the street. The real fear was the reputation of the people that he served. Now we slip deeper. Not into the streets, not into the alley fog, but into the rooms where bodies go after the living are done with them. The medical schools, the dissecting theater, the anatomy labs. Because you cannot talk about Jack the Ripper without talking about the cadaver trade. And oh yes, that was a trade, a business, a pipeline of bodies, a pipeline that ran straight through Whitechapel. The body market? In the 1880s, the demand for cadavers in London's medical schools was far higher than the legal supply. Only the bodies of executed criminals, unclaimed paupers, and hospital deaths could be used for dissection. But you know what? That was not nearly enough. So where did the rest come from? Well, simply they were stolen, bought, traded, and delivered. You know, the same way you would move grain or opium or guns. And who controlled the trade? Doctors didn't. Hospitals sure didn't. Police didn't. No. The trade was run by organized criminal gangs, working hand in hand with medical students and protected by men of rank who needed the supply. The anatomical schools of Trinity, Guy's, St. Bartholomew's, all of them, they all had cadavers coming in. Fresh surgical cuts already made, organs missing, no paperwork, and no investigation. And where were the cheapest bodies acquired? Whitechapel, where a woman could disappear on a Thursday and be on the dissecting slab by Monday. But here's where it turns. The Ripper killings were not random mutilations. They were targeted extractions. Not every organ was taken. Not every wound was exploratory. Each removal was precise. A uterus, a kidney, a heart in one case. These are organs of reproduction, filtration, of life. These are identity organs, the organs that encode who you are and who you can create. The women murdered were not merely sex workers. They were women who had children, had friends in common, shared lodging houses, and crucially, shared a social circle linked to the shop girl rumored to have been impregnated by Prince Albert Victor. It was a circle that could talk, a circle that could spread a story, a circle that could create scandal. Remove the circle, remove the story. Cut the womb, you cut the bloodline. Remove the kidney, remove the medical trace. Take the heart, and you remove the humanity. This was not murder. It was erasure. And what about the royal disease? Now we arrive at the quiet sickness running underneath all of this. A disease that the royal family feared more than assassination or revolt. Syphilis. Untreated syphilis was eating through London like fire through old timber. But in the royal family bloodline, it would mean dynastic collapse. Prince Albert Victor, Eddie, was rumored to have had it. And how does syphilis spread? Through intimate contact. So if Eddie had infected a young shop girl, and that girl talked to her friends, and one of those friends threatened to expose him, you don't just silence her, you silence everyone she spoke to. A disease is dangerous, but a story is terminal. Now, what about the body that should not have been possible? The fourth canonical victim, Catherine Eddowes. Her body tells the truth the best. Her left kidney was removed and sent, not sold, not discarded, not consumed, sent, wrapped neatly with a letter delivered to George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. And the letter said, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. Signed, Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. Now listen up. Forget the theatrical cannibal line. That's just bait. It's like today's clickbait. It's distraction. It's smoke. The important part is the kidney, because the only way that the kidney could have been preserved long enough to transport and still be recognizable is if it had been treated using medical chemical preservatives. Not available in butcher shops, not available in storefronts, not something you could buy casually. It required access to a surgical lab, a lab with preservation jars, a lab with controlled acids and alcohol compounds, a medical school lab, which means the killer removed the kidney cleanly, preserved it properly, knew where to send it, and knew how to create maximum fear. This was a man with education, with facility access, and with help. You don't just remove a kidney in the drunk dark unless you have done it before. You don't preserve it unless you've been trained. And you don't mail it unless you want to send a message. And that message was not for the public. It was for the men covering for him. It said, if I am caught, I am taking all of you with me. That's not insanity. That's leverage. That's a man who knows exactly how high stakes are. This was not chaos. This was not madness. This was not a monster in the dark. This was a cleanup operation, a surgical purge, a silencing. And like all state-sanctioned violence, when the objective was complete, it stopped. Not because he was done killing, but because there were no loose ends left to remove. We've traced the shadows. We've listened to the muffled hoofbeats in the fog. We've followed the clean cuts through human flesh like a pen through paper. Now we step into the heart of the matter. Because every conspiracy, real or imagined, eventually points to a name. A single individual around whom this web is spun. And in the case of Jack the Ripper, that name is Sir William Gull, royal physician, knighted surgeon, trusted confidant of Queen Victoria herself, a man who treated aristocrats and prime ministers and ambassadors, the highest of the high. And here is something more history books will never print. Sir William Gull was a man of cold detachment, a man who viewed the human body not as life, but as a mechanism. He once said as a student, emotion clouds the scalpel. Detach, and you may see. This is not the philosophy of a healer. It is the philosophy of a man who can cut without hesitation. And the stroke that didn't stop him. Officially, by 1887, Sir William Gull had suffered a series of small strokes. He was declared partially incapacitated. He was removed from regular medical duties. But influential men are not removed from power simply because their hands tremble. They're given new roles, private roles, quiet roles. Wealthy patients still summoned him. Discreet carriage still carried him. The royal household still consulted him. And that's how the cover story was built. He was too frail, he was too weak, too sick to kill anybody. But here's the thing. Every eyewitness claimed to see the Ripper described a man in his late 40s to early 60s. Stiff posture, measured gait, calm hand. That's not madness. That's age wrapped in discipline. And Sir William Gull was 71. But with attendance? But with a coachman? With controlled windows of times? Suddenly, he fits the silhouette exactly. And the coachman, John Netley, a nobody on paper, a carriage driver, poor background, not notable, except that he had access to Royal Mews. He was seen repeatedly in Whitechapel during the killings and died under accidental circumstances shortly after Gull's death. Witnesses say he was run down by a carriage. The official record says it was just by chance. But the story whispers he was silenced. Because when a cleanup operation ends, you don't leave the janitor laying around to tell people what they saw. And the handler, Sir Robert Anderson, Assistant Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, devout Mason, politically insulated, he took a convenient leave of absence during the height of the killings, and he happened to return exactly when they stopped. And in his private writing, the ones not meant to be published, he stated, "The identity of the killer is known, but cannot be revealed." That is not speculation. That is not rumor. That is confession. Silently phrased, politely phrased, but a confession all the same. Now the final loose end. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly. She was the last, the most brutal, the most destroyed, because Mary Jane Kelly wasn't just another woman on the street. She was the one who knew the story, the one who could name the people, and the one who could connect the others. Mary Kelly was the mouthpiece, the storyteller, the secret keeper. And when she died, her death was not a killing, it was a deletion. Her body was found inside her single rented room, the door locked, windows covered, no rush, no public street, no chance of interruption. Her face was removed completely. Her heart was missing. You don't remove the face of your victim unless you mean to erase them. Not just silence them, but just to unmake them. And the heart? You take the heart when you want to make certain the story dies with them. And then, silence. No more murders. No more letters. No more messages. The operation was over. The secret was contained. The bloodline protected. The scandal sealed. Sir William Gull died 1 year later. Quietly, comfortably, attended by royalty. John Netley died 2 years later, crushed beneath the wheels of the wagon. Sir Robert Anderson received knighthood. The case was officially closed without being closed. Jack the Ripper did not disappear. He was retired. So here is the conspiracy angle. Jack the Ripper was not a man acting alone. He was the cutting hand of royal preservation, Freemason loyalty, institutional silence, a surgical strike to prevent a dynastic catastrophe, a scandal of paternity, disease, and class collapse. The killings were not random. They were selected, they were strategic, they were ordered, and the police were not baffled. They were complicit. We are not looking for Jack the Ripper in the alley. We are not looking for him in a silhouette against the fog. We are looking for him in the meeting rooms, in the private carriages, at 3 a.m. in the buildings where the doors never open to the streets. Because the greatest conspiracies are not built on lies. They are built on truths no one dares to say out loud. You are listening to WCAK 1124 AM. I am your host, Sal Rock. We will return right after this message to enter our second angle, the coincidence angle. Stay buckled up, people.
They say a good watch tells time, but an Oasis watch might bend it. Polished steel, perfect precision, yet every owner has a story. A missed train suddenly on time, a meeting that already happened, a moment they swore they had lived before. Coincidence? Or something more? Some claim the Oasis company built their watches using a mechanism discovered in an abandoned observatory, gears that don't measure seconds. They shift them. Other whispers it's the cover-up. The Oasis didn't invent timepieces. They reverse-engineered one. You don't notice it at first. The ticking seems normal until you realize the clock on the wall is moving backwards, and you're not where you were a minute ago. Oasis watches. They don't just keep time, they keep secrets. And remember to make Oasis your basis for life.
Under the streetlight flicker and fade, names in the shadows that never get made, whispers of truth buried under the dust, locked in a file they tell us to trust. Is it conspiracy or just a strange coincidence? Does the story never make any sense? Something's hidden just out of sight, a cover-up slipping into the night, and we still ask, who's pulling the strings? Stay awake, stay aware. Nothing is ever as it seems.
Stay awake. Stay aware. Nothing is ever as it seems. Welcome back to WCAK 1124 AM. I am your host, Sal Rock. We are sitting here in the matrix of the mind tonight, taking a deep dive look at Jack the Ripper. Was he a myth? Was he a monster? Was he a man? Which man was he? We're going to look at every angle tonight. Let's burn down the conspiracy board. Let's rip out the red yarn. Let's pretend there are no royals, no Freemasons, no secret orders. Let's look at London as it really was. Because if you want a coincidence explanation, you don't need a mastermind. You just need Whitechapel, 1888. And that place was hell. Not poetic, not symbolic, actual rotting hell. The slum of slums. Whitechapel wasn't poor, it was infested. Human beings stacked on human beings, shoulder to shoulder in rooms meant for one. 12,000 people to a single square mile? Sewers backing up into the drinking water? The air itself carrying sickness like a carrier wave. You put your hand on a brick wall in Whitechapel, and you were touching typhus, tuberculosis, syphilitic skin oils, sweat, and the breath of dying lungs. I mean, men slept sitting upright in 4-penny coffins, tied to ropes because beds cost more than surviving. Women sold themselves for not money, but gin. Not romance, but warmth. You got 6 pence? Good. I won't freeze tonight. That is not vice. That is just plain survival. And the police were not heroes. In movies, the police are struggling detectives with sharp eyes and sharper minds. No, no. The Metropolitan Police in 1888 were undertrained, understaffed, underpaid, and scarred. They had no forensic science, no fingerprinting, no standardized interviewing, no blood typing, no crime scene photography worth anything. If someone slit your throat in the alley, the investigation went something like this. 1. Someone with a lantern says, "Oh, Christ." 2. A constable writes a brief note. 3. They wash the blood away into the gutter. You want coincidence? Coincidence is the system was broken before the killing ever started. Jack the Ripper didn't evade law enforcement. Law enforcement really never had a chance. And the women, the victims, they were not chosen for symbolic reasons. They were not part of a circle. They were not selected for a message. They were simply available. They were alone. They were sick. They were exhausted, drunk, homeless, and known to walk dark alleys at 3 a.m. A killer doesn't need genius if the environment is already prey rich. These women had nowhere to go. No one to defend them. No one who would notice if they disappeared for 12 hours. Their last words were usually something like, "I'll be back when I get a client." They were walking into the dark, hoping to find a stranger. The coincidence theory says they simply found the wrong stranger. And strangers? Well, strangers were violent. The violence was not supernatural. In the conspiracy angle, the cuts were surgical. In the coincidence angle, they are not. I mean, let's be clear. The wounds were horrific, yes, but that doesn't mean trained. Anyone with a steady hand, rage, time, and a sharp blade can do damage that looks surgical precision. I mean, death is easy. Mutilation? Even easier. Removal is muscle, not education. But here's the key. He didn't remove organs cleanly. He tore, he hacked, and he probed. The medical examiners at the time they were slow, old school, and often drunk themselves. Their comments on skill were relative, certainly not absolute. I mean, a butcher from Smithfield Market could have produced the same cuts. A slaughterhouse worker, he could have done the same removals. A mortuary assistant, a knacker, a knifeman who culls diseased livestock. We don't need a royal surgeon. We need a man who knows meat. And in Whitechapel, meat was everywhere. Cattle, sheep, pigs, dead animals in gutters, blood on stones. I mean, half the men in the East End could open a body, and none of them needed a degree to do it. And the killings? They escalated because he got faster, he got bolder, and nobody stopped him. That isn't conspiracy. That's psychology. A killer who succeeds keeps killing. A killer who is not captured grows confident. A killer who discovers he enjoys control will escalate. The mutilations weren't a message. They were compulsion, experimentation, or practice. You know, coincidence says we are not dealing with a surgeon at all. We are dealing with a man who learned while he killed. And no one stopped him because no one ever would have back then. So here is the coincidence angle so far. There was no plot, no aristocracy, no ritual, no secret. It was just simply a broken city, a vulnerable population, a failing police force, and a killer with growing confidence. The murders happened because the world made them easy, and they stopped because something interrupted him. I don't know, it could have been illness, death, prison for another crime, emigration, suicide, insanity. We will never know. Not because the truth was hidden, though, but because the truth rotted and collapsed with the city that actually created it. You know, if we are stripping away conspiracy, and if we are removing ritual and royal drama, then Jack the Ripper is not a symbol. He's simply a man. And men leave trails. Not poetic trails, not coded letters or Masonic symbols. They leave stuff like debt, anger, a room they couldn't afford, a job they keep losing, people who say, he just ain't right. So let's walk the suspects. Without the Victorian fascination, without the newspaper fog, without the myth, just what was known and why it matters. Now let's take a look at some of the suspects that they had. One, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant. He was poor. He was a mute during his fits and seizures that he had. He was in and out of work, lived in Whitechapel during the murders. He had violent episodes, and he heard voices in his head. Well, he winds up in an asylum years later. Why does he fit the bill? He lived right in the kill zone. He hated women, especially sex workers. He said it openly many, many times. He was known to follow women at night, staring at them, breathing heavily. His own family said he was dangerous and not to be left alone. Why he doesn't need conspiracy? Because schizoid breaks do not require motive. They require opportunity, and Whitechapel gave him that. Why he may still not be our man? His physical build. He was thin, he was weak, he slouched. The killer moved bodies, lifted, dragged. Kosminski likely did not have the strength. He might have been strong in mind, but perhaps not in muscle. 2, Michael Ostrog. He was a professional liar, a con man, a petty thief, loved to pretend he was educated, refined, and worldly. He wasn't. He was a street rat with expensive vocabulary. Why does he fit the bill? He had sudden rages, knife ownership, familiar with hospitals and morgues through scams. He never had stable addresses anywhere. Why he fails the bill? He was a known coward. The Ripper had nerves of steel. Ostrog had swagger and ran when real fear happened. Ostrog, he liked the story, but not the killings. 3, James Maybrick. This is where modern Ripper hysteria got tangled. Diaries, forged letters, the collector craze. So let's kill the romance. James Maybrick was a drug addict. He was addicted to cocaine and arsenic. He was a wealthy cotton merchant, sickly, dying slow from self-administered poison, married to a woman who eventually killed him. Now, why some thought he was the Ripper? He wrote violent fantasies. But fantasies are common in the diseased, especially while rotting from arsenic. The Ripper diary, attributed to him, is most certainly fake, written a century later just to sell. His real probability is near zero. I mean, this is tourism, not evidence. 4, George Chapman, born Severin Klawowski. Now we reach someone that matters. Barber, surgeon apprentice, actually trained to cut, actually lived in Whitechapel, actually known to be cruel, violent, and cold. He later poisoned 3 wives slowly, patiently, watching them die emotionless. Why he fits the bill? He had anatomical skill. He had the calmness of a man who sees people as tools. He already killed before. He killed again after. But why he may not be the one? His later murders were all poison, not blades. Poison is control without a mess. The Ripper was mess at maximum volume. Chapman liked watching the slow fade, not the open blood frenzy. Still, Chapman is the first one we've mentioned who could have done it without needing myth to make him frightening. 5, the butchers, the slaughtermen, the knackers. This is where coincidence stops being tidy. Because Whitechapel wasn't full of one killer. It was full of men who killed for work. Every street had pig splitters, sheep skinners, cattle bleeders, men who knifed lungs from ribs for wages, men who cleaned intestines by hand. They didn't wash. Blood was part of their clothes, their skin, hair, breath. Any one of them could have cut a throat clean, removed organs fast, killed without hesitation. Not because of psychology, but simply because it was Tuesday and they were at work. The Ripper could have been any one of them. or 3 different ones, or one who changed jobs, changed names, vanished into a crowd of men who already smelled of blood. The perfect camouflage isn't clever, it's normalcy. In Whitechapel, a man covered in gore and blood at 4 a.m. was not strange. He was just simply coming home from work. So here is the coincidence outline taking shape. Jack the Ripper does not need to be aristocracy. He does not need to be educated. He does not need to be a genius or a doctor or a mastermind. He only needs to be a man with a blade, a man comfortable with blood, a man whose world gave him access to women who could be taken without a trace, at a time where evidence was never preserved, in a district where murder was common enough to become noise. The coincidence theory says Jack the Ripper is not a legend. He is ordinary. And the women he killed were not symbols. They were simply unlucky in a city where luck had already become extinct. If we are stripping away the grand conspiracy, we must also strip away the myth-making machine. That means the letters. The Dear Boss letter, From Hell letter, the countless scraps of paper claiming to be Jack himself. Coincidence says most of these are hoaxes. Not clever hoaxes, not genius-level planning, just the newspaper feeding frenzy. And the press that created Jack, the papers of 1888 weren't just news. They were the tabloids of fear. Sensationalist, selling readership, hysterical, hungry for blood. Every body in the street was an opportunity. A murdered woman in Whitechapel was front page material. A letter with mocking handwriting was a godsend. The Dear Boss letter? Almost certainly written by a journalist. He had access to early reports, access to witnesses' statements, access to the blood and chaos already happening, and he stamped it with Jack the Ripper, because names sell newspapers. Not mystery, not terror. From letters to legend. After a few letters hit the press, they take on a life of their own. The public begins to talk. Rumors start. Fears spread. Each report of Jack encounter is not evidence. It is confirmation bias. I saw him in the lane. He brushed past me at the market. I heard the screams. Each story adds weight to the legend, not reality. Coincidence says the letters were not communications from a mastermind. They were the press manipulating panic. And the panic fed more letters, more stories, more fear. The killer did nothing to create the legend. The newspapers did. The crowd did. The city itself did. And the timing of the deaths. Coincidence is also found in timing. 5 canonical victims, 5 weeks, all on days when streets were darker than usual, nights when patrols were short, streets quiet, fog thick, no ritual, no planning, just opportunity and environment aligning. The women chosen were vulnerable. The man was opportunistic. The city was malfunctioning. It was a perfect storm. The name Jack the Ripper? Jack didn't sign himself. He didn't strategize the myth. Coincidence says the name stuck because the press published it. It became shorthand for fear, death, horror. Not because of intelligence, not because of ritual, not because of aristocracy. It stuck because people love stories. Stories are easier to remember than randomness. Jack became a character in a story, not a man in the street. The coincidence of silence. And finally, why did the killings stop? Coincidence says, well, maybe he died. Maybe he was arrested for another crime, or maybe he left town. Maybe he simply decided to stop. There is no master plan, no shadowy orders, no hidden agenda, just circumstance changing. The environment shifted, opportunity vanished, and the man who thrived in chaos no longer had chaos to exploit. So let's consider the coincidence angle summary so far. Look at Whitechapel as it really was. a decaying city, vulnerable population, police overwhelmed and understaffed, a killer who was ordinary in skill but abnormal in impulse, a press that amplified panic. So coincidence says the legend is bigger than the crime. Jack the Ripper was not aristocracy. He was not a surgeon. He was not a phantom guided by ritual. He was a man with opportunity, a man who exploited the weakness of the city. Nothing more, nothing less. If the Ripper was not a mastermind, if the city was not a stage for conspiracy, then every story, every clue, every alleged sighting falls into human error. Coincidence says most of the reports were wrong. Witnesses saw men they couldn't really identify. People followed shadows and assumed guilt. Streets were foggy, dark, and chaotic. Fear made ordinary men seem like monsters. And the eyewitness problem? Look at the key sightings. Elizabeth Long saw a man talking to Annie Chapman. 3 officers saw someone with Catherine Edwards. Mary Jane Kelly was found alone, mutilated. No one saw anything. Human memory is terrible in fog and fear. People mix faces, forget heights, confuse voices. Coincidence says the Ripper sightings could have been a drunken passerby, a neighbor returning from work, any man with a knife. The city was dense and busy. Shadows moved like predators, and anyone could resemble or be misremembered as the killer. The letters, they were mostly hoaxes. We spoke of them before. Let's expand. The Dear Boss and the From Hell letters, well, they were almost certainly fabricated or exaggerated. Editors had access to witnesses and statements. Anyone with handwriting skills could mimic this panic. Copycats of pranksters sent letters feeding the hysteria. Coincidence says the Ripper's identity may have never corresponded to the letters at all. The letters are noise, amplifying fear without revealing truth. And what about the randomness in selection? The victims were sex workers, yes, but coincidence says they were simply accessible. Walking the streets late at night, alone, vulnerable, with no one nearby to help? There was no message, no ritual, no symbolism. The killer didn't choose them because of rank, connection, or knowledge. He chose them because circumstance delivered them. And the particular mutilations? Not surgical, not ritualistic, but aggravated, frenzied, and opportunistic, possibly practiced on animals or livestock beforehand, which was common in Whitechapel trades. Coincidence says the brutality was chance escalated by experience, not plan. The killer could have been anyone. If we remove the royal connections, remove the Freemasons, and remove secret orders, a butcher could do it. A slaughterhouse worker could do it. A mentally ill man could do it. Multiple men could have done it independently. Coincidence doesn't care about genius. Coincidence cares about alignment. Opportunity aligned, vulnerability aligned, chaos aligned, and the city's system failed to prevent any of it. Now, let's step back and look at the story as a whole. Stripped of myth, stripped of conspiracy, stripped of deliberate design, Jack the Ripper becomes something terrifyingly ordinary. Not a shadowed genius, not a surgical ghost, not a hand of the crown, just a man, a broken city, a series of tragic, coincidental alignments. Every death in Whitechapel in 1888 was magnified by fear. Streets were dark and police were slow. Bodies were mutilated. Rumors spread like fire. Well, coincidence says the horror was manipulated by perception. The press played the audience played themselves. Every shadow on the wall was Jack. Every man with a coat was Jack. Every scream in the alley was proof. But in reality, most of it was normal urban chaos, misunderstood. Humans cannot handle randomness. We see patterns in clouds. We see messages in static. We see intelligence where there is none. The Ripper legend is the result of this instinct. 5 murders happened in weeks. They were all in Whitechapel. They were all brutal. Humans see connection, pattern, plan. Well, coincidence says there may have been none. Just unfortunate timing, opportunity, and an unstable killer. So many suspects, so many accusations. Kaminsky, Chapman, Maybrick, Ostrog, a dozen others. Coincidence explains why everyone blamed someone different. Eyewitnesses were wrong. Records were incomplete. Fear made ordinary people appear sinister. Random deaths and missing persons were linked incorrectly. No grand plot, no royal hand, just the sloppiness of survival in a dense, failing city. The letters weren't proof of a mastermind. They were opportunistic hoaxes. Journalists wanted sales, locals wanted attention, copycats wanted thrills. Coincidence says the letters amplified the legend more than the killer ever could. Jack the Ripper exists because the press and the panic made him exist. Coincidence explains the stopping simply by death, arrest, illness, movement, chance. No silent orders, no intervention, no cover-up, just the end of alignment. So, a final reflection. Jack the Ripper as coincidence is a story of a city, not a man. A city broken by poverty and disease, vulnerable women caught in circumstance, an overwhelmed police force, opportunistic murders, perhaps multiple, acting in darkness, and a press feeding panic. All the legend, all the letters, all the myth, products of randomness amplified by human fear. The Ripper doesn't need a conspiracy to terrify us. He is terrifying because the world made him possible. And the lesson? Some horrors are not engineered. Some patterns exist only in hindsight. Some legends exist because the city, the people, and circumstance aligned with tragic precision. You are sitting in the matrix of the mind here on WCAK 1124 AM, The Dark Zone. I am your host, Sal Rock. We will return right after this message for segment 3, Cover Up.
Back in 1888, the police insisted Jack the Ripper used nothing but a simple blade. But historians whisper otherwise. A tool far too precise for its time, too clean, too modern. Today, that same precision is found in Oasis brand power tools. Cuts that line up perfectly in the dark, blades that never dull, a motor hum that feels almost alive. Coincidence? Or the same technology that carved through Victorian London, resurfacing in your woodshop? Some believe Oasis reverse-engineered a device recovered from an old Whitechapel cellar, a tool hidden for over a century. Others whisper of a cover-up, that someone knew the Ripper wasn't just skilled, he was equipped. But conspiracy or not, once you squeeze the trigger, you feel it. That strange, guiding pull, like the tool knows exactly what to do. Oasis power tools. Perfect precision from a past no one wants to talk about. And remember to make Oasis your basis or light.
Conspiracy, coincidence. coincidence. Cover up. Nothing is ever what it seems. Nothing is ever what it seems. Nothing is ever as it seems.
Welcome back to WCAK 1124 AM here in the Dark Zone. Tonight, we are doing a deep dive on Jack the Ripper. We are looking at every angle of the story, and we're going to finish in the last segment, the paranormal segment, with a story that's probably never been heard before. Now, we return to the cover-up angle. Listen closely. This isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is history hiding in plain sight. Because Jack the Ripper was not just a killer, he was a story, and stories can be controlled. The first cover-up began before the first murder was fully investigated. Whitechapel was chaos, yes, but chaos does not hide bodies. People hide bodies, and authorities hide what they fear. The police were ordered to silence. Sir Charles Warren, then Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, was under pressure from the Home Office. He received telegrams from government officials who feared panic. They didn't care about murder victims. They cared about social disorder, about political fallout, and about the reputation of the British Empire itself. Orders came down: minimize public awareness, downplay reports, keep witness statements quiet, delay official statements, stop speculation in newspapers when possible. Well, the press would print anyway, but official police files? Buried, destroyed, redacted. Coincidence doesn't explain this. Chaos doesn't explain this. Authority does. What about the letters and the diversions? The infamous Dear Boss and From Hell letters, some may have been genius, yes, but others, deliberate misdirections. Letters were fed to the press to frame a story, distract public attention from inconvenient facts, create a single, monstrous ripper, avoid investigation of mere sensitive targets. I mean, think about this. The killer had to remain unknown, and yet the press and police created him publicly, simultaneously? That is cover-up genius, not legend-making, just genius. And witness silencing. Multiple witnesses reported seeing strange men near victims. Elizabeth Long saw Annie Chapman with a well-dressed man. Officers saw Catherine Eddowes with a suspect carrying a black bag. Other locals reported shadowy figures. Did anyone follow up on these? Well, some, briefly. Most, quietly, and then never again. The witnesses themselves were pressured, told their observations were irrelevant, threatened with arrest for interference, paid to stay silent, lost credibility in reports. Notice a pattern? It's not incompetence, it's control. The royal connection, or fear of scandal. We've mentioned it before, lightly in segment 1. Now, let's be started. Prince Albert Victor, whispers of syphilis, rumors of involvement with women in Whitechapel. If any of this became public, it'd be a national scandal, a dynastic embarrassment. There'd be political fallout, calls for adaptation and investigation. So what happens? Investigators steer focus away from aristocracy. Incriminating evidence is lost. Names are not recorded. Reports are misfiled or destroyed. The cover-up begins not with murder, but begins with fear. And what about the assistant commissioner's silent confession? Sir Robert Anderson, later, writing privately, revealed a chilling truth. He wrote, "The identity of the killer is known, but cannot be revealed." Those words are key. Not speculation, not fiction, not rumor. The Ripper's identity was protected. Protected not because he was clever, protected because those around him were powerful. And once the powerful are involved, the cover-up perpetuates itself. The public knew only fragments. The newspapers crafted monsters. The police buried truth. And those who could have spoken were silenced. The streets of Whitechapel hid the bodies. The authorities hid the truth. And history still hides it. The cover-up didn't end with silenced witnesses or carefully framed letters. It continued in the records themselves. Because to hide the truth, you don't just hide the body. You have to corrupt the trail. And what about the police files that vanished? Many original investigative notebooks are missing or incomplete. Witness statements lost in transit, crime scene sketches misplaced, coroner's reports redacted or sanitized. I mean, ask yourself, how does a city of bureaucrats lose 5 murder investigations at once? By mistake? How about incompetence? Or deliberate deception? Coincidence doesn't explain patterned loss of documents at critical points. Now, there was conflicting statements and redirection. Investigators frequently contradicted one another. Constables claimed to see a suspect. Inspectors said the descriptions didn't match. Coroners gave medical evidence that conflicted with eyewitness testimony. Was this confusion natural, or was it maybe engineered? The Ripper case benefited from the chaos, intentionally or not. Each misstatement created misdirection. Each contradictory report ensured that no one suspect could be pinned down. Each forgotten detail removes accountability, and the result? The perfect smokescreen. Many of the coroners were under pressure. Coroners were not neutral. Threats from political figures, warnings about public panic, subtle nudges to keep reports vague. The coroner might note extensive mutilation consists with knife, cause of death, hemorrhage, but ignore the positioning of the organs, the depth of the cuts, the time of death discrepancies. Why? Because some facts are too dangerous, and some facts would point to someone untouchable. Through this whole investigation, there was mismanagement of evidence. Evidence that should have been carefully cataloged was mishandled. Blood-stained clothing sent between offices and then lost. Crime scene tools, if any, not preserved. Letters handled by multiple hands, destroying forensic value. Today, DNA could solve this in hours. Back then, chaos and deliberate negligence ensured no chain of custody existed. Coincidence? Maybe partially. Cover-up? Absolutely. Let's talk for a minute about manipulating public perception. The newspapers amplified the terror, deliberately or accidentally. Misidentifications of the killer, inaccurate sketches, sensationalized letters. The public consumed this all as truth, never knowing how much was engineered silence. The authorities did nothing to correct it. Why? Because the official story served social order. Because the real story couldn't be told. And because once a scandal touched the upper class, it became untouchable. The cover-up extended from evidence to public perception. Every error, every missing report, every redirection of attention, all of it served the same goal: to protect the powerful, protect the narrative, protect the myth. And by the time historians arrived, most of the truth had already been buried intentionally. Now we ask the hardest question: who benefited from the cover-up? Because cover-ups never exist in a vacuum. They always protect someone. They always preserve something. In this case, the beneficiaries were not the victims, not the poor, not the terrified streets. They were the powerful. Prince Albert Victor, Eddie, remains central in many whispers. Rumored to have syphilis, rumored to have been involved with young women in Whitechapel, rumored to have fathered illegitimate children. If this became public, It would be dynastic embarrassment, questions about the royal lineage, political scandal of historic magnitude. The cover-up's first priority? Silence anyone who could connect him to Whitechapel. Witnesses who knew details were ignored or discredited. Statements that implicated the elite were never recorded in official files. The media was subtly redirected towards Jack the Ripper as a common criminal, not a scandal involving royalty. Coincidence cannot explain this kind of targeted protection. Only deliberate cover-up can. Police and government conclusion? Sir Charles Warren, Commissioner, under constant pressure, threatened by the Home Office, ordered to keep details from the public, pressured to avoid embarrassing the monarchy. Sir Robert Anderson, the Assistant Commissioner, later claimed the killer's identity was known, but refused to release the name. The police were not incompetent. They were constrained by orders from above. Every lost document, every delayed investigation, every misfiled report, strategically useful. The cover-up extended beyond the royals. Aristocracy expected protection from scandal. Police resources were redirected towards preserving social order. The poor could die in alleys without investigation because their deaths didn't threaten the system. This created a perfect storm of selective attention. Women in Whitechapel? Disposable. The killer? Concealed. Witnesses? Silenced or disbelieved. The narrative? Controlled. Every failure had a purpose. The press became a tool of cover-up, intentionally or not. Sensationalist headlines created distraction. False leads focused public attention away from powerful individuals. The monster in the alley, or Jack the Ripper, myth became the public face of danger. The media amplified fear while the authorities ensured the real story never surfaced. A man was feared as Jack. Meanwhile, the truth was buried in bureaucracy. The people who could implicate the elite were either ignored, discredited, or simply vanished. And what is the logic of silence? Everything points to a chilling, methodical logic. Hide the identity, protect the elite, minimize public panic, use legend to replace fact. No one outside the system needed to know, and if anyone got too close, witnesses died or disappeared. Evidence was lost. Stories were twisted. By the time history arrived, the truth was almost impossible to recover. Cover-up is not a single act. It is a process, a slow, deliberate burying of knowledge. Jack the Ripper's mystery is not unsolved because we could not find him, or they could not find him at the time. It is unsolved because those who knew ensured we never could. The cover-up was meticulous, not sloppy, not rushed. It was methodical. And the methods themselves tell a story, one of power, fear, and control. And erasing physical evidence? Bodies were never just buried. They were manipulated. Mary Jane Kelly, the most mutilated, inside a room, away from prying eyes. Catherine Eddowes, organs removed, possibly to destroy identifying evidence. Others, the city cleaned the streets, the alleys, the gutters. Coroner's reports omitted key details, time discrepancies, wound specifics, body positions. Why? Because certain information could implicate the wrong people. Peoples whose names could not appear in print. Even the few surviving reports were heavily sanitized. Many witnesses were not passive bystanders. Threatened quietly, bribed for silence, told their testimony was irrelevant, discredited in newspapers. Some were removed entirely. John Pizer, the leather apron, harassed and threatened by police. John Netley, the coachman, allegedly connected, died under suspicious circumstances. Coincidence cannot explain this chain. This is calculated protection. Misdirection in investigations. Investigators were ordered to focus on petty suspects. Kosminski, Chapman, Ostog, all examined in public files, creating an illusion of action. Multiple suspects kept the public distracted. Focus on common criminals prevented attention on elite connections. Meanwhile, the real story, if there was a connection to aristocracy, remained uninvestigated. The press amplified these diversions. Jack the Ripper became the monster of Whitechapel, not a scandal touching London's highest circles. The letters were tools of control. The Dear Boss and From Hell letters, whether authentic or not, directed public fear. They created a single, identifiable villain, shifted attention away from the powerful individuals or systemic failures, encouraged hysteria and rumor while authorities quietly suppressed inconvenient truths. The letters were not just media fodder, they were strategic misdirection. What was the logic of the cover-up? Look closely at the pattern. Silence witnesses, destroy or lose evidence, control press narrative, focus investigations or expandable suspects, protect the powerful, let the public consume fear, not truth. This was not chaos. This was orchestrated, and it worked. Jack the Ripper's identity was never revealed, not to this day. Authorities remained unscathed. Panic replaced fact. The legend grew while the truth sank. The cover-up is why 130 years later, we still debate this subject. The cover-up is why, despite hundreds of modern analyses, we are left with just fragments. The cover-up ensured that the legend would outlive the facts. Now we arrive at the end game. Cover-ups are not about what happens immediately. They are about control over time, about who remembers, who forgets, and who never knows. Jack the Ripper was not just a murderer. He became a tool, a mask hiding truths that some could not afford to reveal. Let's take a look at who benefited. The royal family, shielded from scandal, protected dynastic reputation, avoided political crisis. The police maintained authority despite massive investigative failure, controlled public panic, preserved trust in law enforcement while quietly covering gaps. And the press, well, they profited from sensationalism, narrative control to keep attention on fear rather than fact, and social disorder. The poor and the powerless remained invisible. Elite crimes, connections, or negligence stayed hidden. The beneficiaries were powerful institutes, not the victims, not the witnesses, and certainly not the public. So what was lost? The truth, never fully recorded, deliberately obscured. A lot of evidence destroyed, misfiled, or lost. Lives were lost, women killed, witnesses silenced, suspects framed. Understanding was lost. We may never know whether the killer acted alone or in connection with privileged forces. Coincidence and chaos can explain some gaps, yes. But the deliberate gaps, those are the fingerprints of cover-up. Now, why does history remain silent? Think about it. Records were erased, witnesses silenced, letters misused, evidence disappeared, stories manipulated. History has a memory, but memory is fragile. And in Whitechapel, memory was actively suppressed. Jack the Ripper's identity was not lost by chance. It was buried, curated, and protected. The chaos we see today, conflicting suspects, contradictory reports, myths, legends, is the product of centuries of selective erasure. Every time we debate suspects, Kosminski, Chapman, Maybrick, we are fighting the ghosts of bureaucracy and silence. Every time we trace letters, re-examine the crime scenes, analyze sketches. We are reconstructing what someone did not want us to know. The legend exists because the cover-up required a legend. And the lesson is stark. Power protects itself. Fear can be weaponized. Truth is disposable. Jack the Ripper became more than a killer. He became a symbol of what happens when murder intersects with authority, secrecy, and a social inequity. My final words on this? People, hear this. The cover-up didn't just protect the killer. It protected a society. A system that valued reputation over justice, fear over clarity, control over truth. Every unanswered question, every missing document, and every whispered rumor, that is the echo of the cover-up. That is why, even now, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains elusive, shadowed, and forbidden. Some mysteries exist not because the world cannot know, but because the world is told not to know. And so, the legend continues. And so, the cover-up endures. I am Sal Rock. You are sitting in the matrix of the mind with me on WCAK 1124 AM here in the Dark Zone. We will enter the bone-chilling final segment, the paranormal segment, right after this message. Stay buckled up.
London, 1888. They say Jack the Ripper vanished without a trace. But one thing was found in a Whitechapel alley, a razor, far too well made for its time. Balanced, perfect, unnaturally sharp. Today, that same precision lives on in the Oasis old-fashioned straight razor, a blade that glides through a shave with impossible ease. Steel honed so fine it catches the light like a whisper. But some wonder, is it just craftsmanship, a coincidence, or the revival of a design no one was meant to see again? Rumors say Oasis acquired old sketches from an unnamed collector, blueprints traced back to a certain Victorian surgeon. Others whisper it's a cover-up, that the Ripper's razor didn't vanish, it evolved. Hold it in your hand, feel that cold, perfect balance and decide for yourself. Oasis straight razors, sharper than history itself. Remember to make Oasis your basis for life.
Welcome back. I am your host, Sal Rock. We are sitting in the matrix of the mind here on WCAK 1124 AM. We are now entering the final bone-chilling segment of this episode, the paranormal segment of Jack the Ripper. You are about to hear a paranormal angle that has never been told. If you scare easy, if you have a hard time sleeping when you're scared, I am here to warn you before you enter this final segment, as it is graphic. The reason it is graphic is because in this segment, we will be hearing the murder spree of Jack the Ripper from Jack's point of view, from the eyes of Jack, from the very mind of Jack as we follow him through the whole killing spree. What he felt, what his thoughts were, what he saw. Let's enter the head of Jack the Ripper. London, 1888, Whitechapel. The cobblestone streets were quiet. The mist grew thicker, dogs howling in the background. The fog clung to the streets of Whitechapel
like a shroud, thick and unrelenting, as if the very air of London had conspired to hide its sins. It was August 30th, 1888, and the night had fallen early, heavy with the promise of rain that never quite came. The gas lamps flickered weakly along Bucks Row, their yellow glow barely piercing the mist, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like spectres on the cobblestones. I walked alone, my boots echoing softly against the damp stone, the chill seeping through my threadbare coat. My name? It doesn't matter. They call me many things by now, but back then I was just a man, tormented by whispers no one else could hear. The voice had started months ago, faint at first, like the rustle of leaves in a distant wind. But tonight, it was louder, insistent, slithering into my mind like a serpent through cracks in a wall.
Look at them,
it hissed, its tone both seductive and venomous, a sound that wasn't quite human, more like the echo of something ancient buried deep in the earth.
The women of the night selling their flesh for pennies. They are filth, vessels of corruption. You must cleanse them, purify the streets.
I shook my head, trying to dispel it, but it only laughed, a low, guttural chuckle that vibrated my skull. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fist, nails digging into palms until I felt the warm trickle of blood. The air smelled of coal smoke and rotting refuse, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of the Thames nearby. Horse-drawn carriages clattered in the distance, their wheels grinding over the uneven roads, but here in the alleyways, it was quiet. Too quiet, save for the occasional cough from a tenement window or the muffled cry of a child. I had no intention of listening. Not tonight. I was tired, my body aching from days of labour in the docks, hauling crates under the relentless sun that had baked London into a sweltering haze during the day. But as I turned onto Osborne Street, the voice grew sharper.
See her there? The one in the ragged shawl, stumbling from the pub. Mary Ann Nichols, they call her, Polly to her friends. She's ripe for the taking. Her blood will sing to you.
I froze. There she was indeed. Mary Ann Nichols, a woman I'd seen before in the doss houses, her face weathered by years of hardship, her eyes glazed from too much gin. She leaned against a wall, laughing hoarsely at nothing. Her skirt hiked slightly as she adjusted her bonnet. The fog swirled around her ankles, making her seem almost ethereal, a ghost already. My heart pounded, a mix of revulsion and something darker, something the voice fed upon. No, I thought, backing away. This is madness. Leave me be. But the voice persisted, wrapping around my thoughts like tendrils of smoke.
You were chosen,
it whispered.
The shadows have marked you. Feel the power in your veins. The knife in your pocket. It's not there by accident. One cut, and you'll know peace. She deserves it. They all do.
I hurried home to my cramped room in a lodging house on Flower and Dean Street, the wallpaper thin and stained with damp. The bed was a lumpy mattress infested with fleas, but I collapsed onto it, pulling the thin blanket over my head. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams where the voice took form. A shadowy figure with eyes like coals, its claws digging into my flesh.
Tomorrow,
it promised in the dream.
Tomorrow we begin.
I awoke on August 31st to a sky heavy with clouds, the air cooler but still oppressive. The streets bustled with the morning rush costermongers hawking their wares. children darting through the crowds, the distant whistle of a train from Liverpool Street Station. But the voice was there, waiting, patient as a predator.
Tonight,
It said.
Bucks Row, midnight.
All day I fought it. I wandered the markets of Spitalfields, the scents of overripe fruits and fresh bread mingling with the sweat of the labourers. I bought a loaf, tearing into it mechanically, but it tasted like ash. My mind raced with memories, my mother's stern face, the father who abandoned us, the years of poverty that had ground me down. Was this voice a demon from hell, or just the madness of a broken man? I didn't know, but as evening fell, the pull grew stronger. The rain started around dusk, a light drizzle that turned the cobblestones slick and treacherous. I found myself drawn back to Bucks Row, the industrial area quiet now, the slaughterhouses and warehouses looming like silent sentinels. The gas lamps hissed softly, their flames guttering in the wind. And there she was again, Mary Ann Nichols, dismissed from her lodging for lack of money, weaving through the shadows, soliciting passers-by.
Now!
The voice commanded, and this time I couldn't resist. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers closing around the handle of the knife. A long, sharp blade I'd sharpened that morning, though I couldn't remember why. The rain pattered on my hat, rivulets running down my neck, chilling my skin. She approached me, her voice slurred.
Fancy a bit of fun, love? 4pence will do ya.
I nodded, leading her into a dark gateway near the stables. The air was thick with the smell of horse manure and wet earth. As she turned her back, adjusting her clothes, the voice roared in triumph.
Strike! Let her blood flow!
My arm moved almost on its own accord. The knife flashed, sinking into her throat with a wet, gurgling sound. She gasped, her hands clutching at the wound, blood spraying in hot arcs that mixed with the rain. I slashed again, deeper, feeling the resistance of flesh and bone. Her body slumped against the wall, eyes wide in shock, mouth opening in a silent scream. The voice purred with satisfaction.
Good. Feel that? The power. But's it not enough? Open her up. Expose the corruption.
Trembling, I knelt in the pooling blood, the rain washing it toward the gutter. My hands, slick and red, pulled at her skirts. The knife cut through fabric and skin, carving into her abdomen with precise, almost surgical strokes. Entrails spilled out, steaming in the cool night air, the metallic scent overwhelming. I arranged them carefully, as if following some unspoken ritual the voice dictated. Time blurred. Minutes? Hours? I stood back, panting, the rain cleansing my hands partially. The fog had thickened, swallowing the scene.
Run!
The voice whispered now, urgent.
More to come.
I fled into the night, heart thundering, the whispers fading to a content hum. Back in my room, I scrubbed the blood from my clothes, the water in the basin turning pink. Sleep came easily now, dreamless, as if the act had sated the beast within. The next days were a blur of normalcy, tainted by dread. September first dawned bright, the rain gone, but the news spread like a wildfire through the pubs and streets. "Murder in Bucks Row," the papers screamed. "Woman butchered." I read the accounts in the Star, my hand steady, the voice silent for once. They described the wounds, the throat cut ear to ear, the abdomen mutilated. No one suspected me. Why would they? I was invisible, a shadow among shadows. But by September 7th, the voice returned, hungrier.
Another,
It demanded.
Annie Chapman. She's waiting in Hanbury Street.
The weather turned foul again, a persistent mist hanging over the East End. The air heavy with the threat of storm. I resisted at first, burying myself in work, but the voice gnawed at me, promising relief only through blood. That night, September 8th, I prowled the streets, the clock striking 5 a.m., as I found her in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, a narrow, cluttered space behind a tenement, filled with discarded crates and the faint stench of sewage. Annie was older, her face lined with sorrow, her body frail from illness. She led me there willingly, her voice tired.
Make it quick, dear.
The voice laughed maniacally.
Oh, he will.
The knife came out faster this time, slashing her throat in one fluid motion. Blood poured, soaking the earth. I worked methodically, the mist muffling any sounds, the early dawn light filtering through like a ghostly veil. I removed organs, uterus, intestines, placing them beside her head, a macabre display. The voice guided my hands, whispering ancient words I didn't understand, as if invoking some dark rite. As I slipped away, the first rays of sun pierced the clouds, warming my bloody face. The voice was pleased.
2 down. The shadows grow stronger.
The days following Annie Chapman's murder were a torment of silence and storm. September 9th brought heavy rains, turning the alleys of Whitechapel into muddy rivers, the water carrying away the filth, but not the fear. The newspapers exploded with hysteria. The Times, the illustrated police news, detailing the fiendish mutilations, speculating on a mad doctor or a foreign butcher. I read them while sitting in a crowded coffeehouse on Commercial Street, the steam from my cup rising like the fog outside, my thoughts a whirlwind.
They fear you.
The voice cooed, re-emerging after its brief satiation.
But they don't know the half of it. The entity within you is eternal, a fragment of the void. It hungers for more souls to feed the darkness.
I pressed my temples, willing it away, but it only grew louder, describing visions of writhing shadows that fed on human suffering. Was it a demon? A curse from some forgotten grave? I didn't know, but its pull was magnetic, drawing me back to the streets each night. The weather shifted erratically, sunny afternoons giving way to chilly evenings, the wind howling through the chimneys like banshees. By September 15th, the police presence increased, bobbies patrolling in pairs, their lanterns swinging like pendulums. I evaded them easily, blending into the crowds of the destitute, my mind replaying the murders in vivid detail. The warmth of the blood, the resistance of flesh, the final gasps. On September 27th, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency. My letter, though I barely remember writing it. Dear Boss, it began, signed Jack the Ripper. The voice had dictated it during a feverish night, promising it would spread terror. And it did. The papers printed it, fueling the panic.
Perfect,
the voice purred. Now they have a name for the vessel. As September 30th approached, the voice became frantic.
Tonight, 2. The stars align for a double offering. Elizabeth Stride first, Long Liz, they call her. Then Catherine Eddowes. Their blood will open the gate wider.
The night was moonless, a total eclipse of reason in my mind. A cold wind swept from the north, carrying the scent of impending rain. I started in Dutfield's yard off Burner Street, the area alive with the sounds of a nearby club. Laughter, music, but isolated in its shadows. Elizabeth Stride appeared around 12:45 a.m., her tall frame in a dark cloak, her Swedish accent lilting as she propositioned me. We stepped into the yard, the gravel crunching underfoot. The voice screamed,
Now, throat first.
The knife bit deep, but a horse whinnied nearby, startling me. I couldn't finish the mutilation. Footsteps approached. I fled, blood on my hands, the voice raging in frustration.
Not enough. Find the next.
Minutes later, in Mitre Square, the rain began, a steady downpour that soaked through my coat. Catherine Eddowes was there, released from jail earlier that evening, her face flushed from drink. The square was deserted, the clock tower tolling 1:30 a.m. We ducked into a corner, the rain pattering on the stones like applause. This time, I was thorough. Throat slashed, abdomen opened, kidneys and uterus removed. I even cut her face, the voice demanding marks to ward off spirits. Blood pooled, mixing with rainwater, flowing into the drains. The act took mere minutes, but in my mind, it stretched eternally, the voice chanting in ecstasy. As I escaped, wiping the knife on her apron, the rain intensified, thunder rumbling overhead like the voice's laughter. Back home, I examined the organs under candlelight, the voice whispering secrets of immorality. The first week of October, 1888, was colder than any man could remember for that time of year. A biting easterly wind swept in from the North Sea, carrying the smell of salt and decay from across the Thames. Frost silvered the rooftops of Whitechapel each morning, and the breath of every costermonger, every starving child, every constable on the beat hung in the air like ghosts refusing to depart. The newspapers had begun calling the killer Leather Apron, then the Whitechapel murderer, and finally, after my own mocking letter, Jack the Ripper. The name tasted like iron in my mouth, and the voice inside my skull purred every time someone whispered it.
They fear the name,
it said, velvet rasp that seemed to come from the base of my spine rather than my ears.
but they should fear what wears the name. We are almost complete. One more, one perfect vessel. Her blood will be the seal.
I tried to starve it. For days I walked the riverside from Wapping to Limehouse, letting the wind scour my face raw, letting the gulls scream overhead until my ears rang. I drank gin until my stomach burned and my thoughts blurred, but the voice only grew clearer, patient, ancient, amused. It recites lists, names of women I had never met, addresses I had never visited, details of wounds I had not yet inflicted. It spoke in a language that was not quit English, syllables that tasted of grave dirt and candle smoke. Sometimes it sang. The tune had no name, but it made dogs whine and horses rear in the street when I passed. On the night of October 7th, the sky was cloudless, the moon a thin, cruel blade. I stood on London Bridge, watching the black water slide beneath me, and felt the voice coil tighter around my heart.
Soon,
it promised.
She is already chosen. Mary Jane Kelly, 25 years old, red hair like autumn fire, a room of her own in Miller's Court. She will let you in because she is lonely and because we have arranged it.
I spat into the Thames and walked away, but my feet carried me east without permission. The next weeks were a fever dream of waiting. The police flooded the district, plainclothes men from H Division and the city, uniformed constables marching 2 by 2, vigilantes with lanterns and cudgels. Sir Charles Warren's bloodhounds were brought in, great slobbering beasts named Barnaby and Burgo, and paraded through the streets while the crowds jeered. I watched from the doorway of a doss house, collar turned up, hat pulled low, and the voice laughed so hard I thought my ribs would crack.
Let them hunt with dogs,
it sneered.
They will never smell what has no scent. We are the space between heartbeats.
I began following her without meaning to. Mary Jane Kelly, sometimes Maria, sometimes Marie Jeanette, lived at 13 Miller Court, a narrow cul-de-sac off Dorset Street that stank perpetually of boiled cabbage and human waste. The court was reached through a low brick archway so tight that 2 men could not pass abreast. Her room was the ground floor front, partitioned off from what had once been a larger house. A single grimy window looked onto the court. A broken pane had been mended with a scrap of red curtain that fluttered like a wound. I saw her first on October 18th. She was singing in the brittle afternoon light, an Irish song about a girl who drowned herself for love. Her voice was low and sweet, surprisingly unbroken by gin. She wore a faded red shawl and a black straw bonnet trimmed with green velvet. When she laughed at something, the sound went through me like a blade sliding between ribs. The voice was ecstatic.
Listen to her. She still believes in love. We will teach her otherwise.
I turned and walked until my legs gave out, collapsing on a bench in Christchurch Yard among the leaning tombstones. The frost had killed the last of the Michaelmas daisies. Their brown heads nodded in the wind. I pressed my forehead to the cold iron railings and begged, someone, something, for silence. There was no answer except the voice, softer now, almost tender.
You are not begging to be spared, my beloved. You are begging to begin.
November arrived with fog so thick it swallowed sound. Gas lamps became smears of sulphur yellow floating in grey nothing. Men walked with their hands outstretched, afraid of colliding with their own shadows. On the 6th, it rained for 36 hours without stopping. Gutters overflowed, cellar dwellings flooded, rats swam in packs through the alleys. I sat in my room on Thrall Street, candle guttering, staring at the knife laid out on yesterday's newspaper. The blade was 9 inches long, single-edged, worn thin from years of sharpening. I had bought it from a cutler in the Minories for 9p. It looked innocent besides the inky headlines. "Will the fiend strike again?" the voice answered for me.
Yes, on the 9th, Lord Mayor's Day. While the city feasts and fireworks bloom over the West End, we will open the final gate.
Thursday, November 8th, 1888, was raw and wet. A wind from the northeast brought sleet that stung like birdshot. I spent the day drifting, Flower and Dean Street, Brick Lane, the 10 Bells, the Queen's Head, watching the crowds prepare for the next day's festivities. Barrows sold hot chestnuts. Children waved paper flags. In the afternoon, the Lord Mayor's procession rehearsed along Whitechapel Road. Carriages, mounted police, soldiers in scarlet. The bands played "See the Conquering Hero Comes." I stood among the onlookers, soaked to the skin, and felt the voice counting heartbeats.
Tomorrow,
It crooned.
tomorrow the city crowns its new king, while we crown our queen in blood.
That night, I could not sleep. The lodging house dormitory stank of wet wool and unwashed bodies. Men snored and uttered in their dreams. I lay rigid, staring at the underside of the bunk above me, while the voice recited a litany of what was to come. The exact weight of her breasts in my hands, the temperature of her liver when I lifted it steaming from the cavity, the way her eyes would reflect the firelight one last time. Around 3 a.m, I rose, dressed silently, and walked out into the hissing rain. Miller's Court was deserted. The archway dripped like a bleeding mouth. Number 13's door stood ajar. A thread of orange light showed beneath it. Music drifted faintly. Someone farther down the court playing a concertina, a mournful tune called "Sweet Violets." I stood in the rain for a long time, water streaming from the brim of my hat, until the voice lost patience.
Go to her. She is waiting.
I knocked twice. The door opened almost immediately. Mary Jane Kelly filled the narrow frame. She was smaller than I remembered, barely 5'3", but the candlelight behind her turned her hair into a halo of fire. She wore a chemise, nothing else, and her feet were bare on the cold flags. Her eyes were very blue and a little unfocused. She had been drinking, but not enough to dull the smile she gave me.
Hello, love.
She said softly.
You're soaked through. Come in out of the wet.
The room was tiny, no more than 12 feet by 10, and almost unbearably warm after the street. A coal fire crackled in the grate. 2 candles burned on the rickety table. The bed took up most of the space, an iron frame, a straw mattress, sheets that had once been white. Clothes hung from nails. Her red shawl, a black velvet bodice, a man's coat that must have belonged to Jos Barnett before he left her. A cheap print of The Fisherman's Widow was pinned above the mantel. Its colours had run from damp. The air smelled of coal smoke, gin, cheap perfume, and something sweeter. Jasmine, perhaps, from the little bottle on the washstand. She closed the door behind me and slid the bolt. The click was soft, final.
You look half drowned.
She said, taking my hat. Water dripped from it onto the threadbare rug.
Take your coat off. I'll hang it by the fire.
I obeyed, moving like a man in a dream. My fingers were numb. She hummed as she fussed with the coat, the same Irish song I had heard weeks before. When she turned back, her smile was shy.
I know you.
She said suddenly.
You've been watching me. Don't deny it. I've seen you in the court.
The voice filled my skull like black water rushing into a sinking ship.
Now!
I stepped forward. She did not flinch. Perhaps she thought I meant to kiss her. My left hand closed around her throat. Gently at first, almost a caress. Her pulse beat against my palm, quick and bird-like. Her eyes widened, but before fear could fully form, I drew the knife from my right sleeve and drove it upward under her chin. The blade grated against bone, severed windpipe and arteries in one clean thrust. Blood jetted over my wrist, hot as fresh tea. She made no sound, only a wet gurgle as I twisted the knife and ripped sideways. The second cut opened her from ear to ear. I felt the resistance of the cervical vertebrae, then nothing. Her body sagged. I lowered her to the bed so that her head hung backwards over the edge, the wound yawning like a red mouth. The voice was singing now, a wordless paean of triumph. I worked quickly at first, then slower, savouring. The knife was sharper than it had ever been. It slid through flesh like silk. I opened her from sternum to pubis in one long sweep, the skin parting with a soft, wet sigh. Steam rose from the cavity, carrying the coppery reek of blood and the fainter, sweeter odour of bowels. I folded back the flaps of abdomen as one might turn the pages of the book. Her intestines spilled out in glistening loops. I lifted them free and draped them over the bedside table like garlands. The uterus came next. Smaller than others, pink and perfect. I placed it beneath her left arm. The kidneys I arranged at her feet. Her heart, still faintly warm, still trying to beat, went under her head like a pillow. I carved her breasts away entirely and laid them on the table beside the intestines, nipples pointing toward the ceiling like accusing eyes. Then the face. I took my time. The knife traced delicate lines across cheeks and forehead, peeling skin in narrow strips. I cut away her nose and ears and arranged them on a pillow beside her ruined mouth. Her lips I sliced off altogether. They looked like pale petals when I set them on the mantel beneath the weeping fisherman's widow. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had ceased to matter. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows that capered across the blood-drenched walls. Outside, the rain had stopped. A church bell tolled 5, then 6. Somewhere, a milk cart rattled over the cobbles. I stood back at last, breathing hard, every inch of me soaked in gore. The room looked like an abattoir designed by a mad artist. Mary Jane Kelly, or what was left of her, lay displayed upon the bed, limbs arranged in a parody of modesty, organs positioned with ceremonial precision. The voice was silent for the first time in months. Not gone, never gone, but sated, curled up inside my skull like a cat beside a warm stove. I washed my hands and face in the basin. The water turned crimson, then pink, then clear again. I folded my blood-stiff clothes into a bundle, dressed in the spare shirt and trousers I found hanging behind the door. Joseph Barnett's, still smelling faintly of fish, and slipped out into the grey dawn. Miller's court was empty. The broken window pane of number 13 reflected the first pale light of Lord Mayor's day. Somewhere in the distance, a band began to play. Fireworks would bloom over the city tonight, while the new Lord Mayor feasted at the Guildhall. I walked away without looking back. The knife I dropped into the Regent's Canal an hour later, it sank without a sound. Saturday, November 10th broke cold and bright. A hard frost silvered every rooftop. The puddles in Dorset Street were skimmed with ice that cracked beneath the boots of the first constables who came running. Thomas Bowyer, McCarthy's shopman, had knocked on Mary Kelly's door for the rent at 10:30. Receiving no answer, he peered through the broken pane and screamed like a child. By noon, the narrow court was jammed with police, journalists, and hundreds of sightseers pressed so tightly that men were lifted off their feet. Inspector Aberline arrived white-faced. Dr. Bond, the police surgeon, pushed through the crowd with his black bag and emerged 20 minutes later, looking as though he might never sleep again. The photographs taken that day, glass plates exposed in the blood-drenched room, would haunt Scotland Yard for decades. I watched from the corner of Crispin Street, half a mile away, eating chestnuts from a barrow. The bells of Christchurch Spitalfields rang out the hour, clear and cold. The voice, quiet since the night before, stirred lazily.
They see your masterpiece at last. Do you feel this terror? Is it sweeter than blood?
The newspapers that afternoon carried no other news. Special editions sold out in minutes. Most horrible murder yet. The Whitechapel fame's climax. Demon butcher claims fifth victim. Woodcuts attempted to reproduce the room and failed. Words themselves seemed to shrink from the task. Respectable ladies in Islington fainted at the descriptions. Clergymen preached fire and brimstone sermons about the wrath of God descending on London's sins. On Sunday, the streets were thronged with the curious. Dorset Street was closed off, but people climbed on each other's shoulders to peer over the heads of constables. Hawkers sold broadsheets and ginger beer. A preacher stood on an overturned crate and howled that the end of days had come. I drifted among them untouched, invisible, tasting their fear like wine. Monday brought snow, wet, heavy flakes that melted as they touched the ground, turning the streets to slush. Mary Kelly's funeral procession wound from Shoreditch Mortuary to St. Patrick's Cemetery in Leytonstone. Thousands lined the route. Woman wept openly. The coffin was cheap deal wood, but it was heaped with flowers, white chrysanthemums mostly, bought with pennies collected in the pubs. I stood at the cemetery gates beneath a yew tree and watched the priest commit what was left of her to the ground. The voice was almost tender.
She is ours now, forever.
Tuesday the inquest opened at Shoreditch Town Hall. Joseph Barnett wept as he identified the body, or what photographs and fragments allowed him to identify. Dr. Bond gave evidence in a voice that shook. The mutilation was the work of some man with the knowledge of anatomy, inflicted after death, the face hacked beyond recognition. The jury returned the inevitable verdict in 10 minutes. Willful murder by person or persons unknown. That night, I walked the river again. The snow had stopped. A thin moon hung over the water like a clipped coin. Barges moved slowly, their red and green lamps smearing reflections across the black tide. I felt strangely light, as though the killings had hollowed me out and filled the cavity with wind. The voice spoke once, softly, from far away.
The circle is complete. 5 points on the pentacle. The gate is sealed. For now. Rest, beloved. When the stars are right again, we will wake.
I did not hear after that. Not for days. Not for years, some say. By Friday, November 16th, Whitechapel was sliding back towards its old rhythms. The extra police were withdrawn. The vigilantes grew bored. Pubs filled again. Costermongers shouted their wares. Children played hopscotch in the gutters. The frost returned harder than ever. Icecleys hung from the eaves like daggers. I stood in Bucks Row at dusk, the very spot where it had begun, and felt nothing. No rage, no hunger, no triumph. Only the vast hollow quiet of a man who has climbed a mountain and found nothing on the summit but snow. Somewhere inside me something vast and ancient turned over in its sleep, dreaming of the next turning of the wheel. And high above, unseen by any living eye, 5 pale wounds in the fabric of the night sky slowly closed, leaving only the faintest scar across the face of London. The city
breathed on, unaware that it had been marked forever. And there you have it. We have looked at every angle of Jack the Ripper tonight. Conspiracy, coincidence, cover-up, and through the very eyes of Jack himself. Now it's up to you to decide. Who was Jack the Ripper? What was Jack the Ripper? Was he a surgeon sent to cover for the Queen's grandson? Was he a myth made up in newspapers? Was he a rogue butcher with a taste for human blood? Or was he a madman hearing ancient voices, cursed into killing over and over and over? And why or how did he disappear? Did the murder stop because the cover story was good enough? Because maybe a butcher was caught and jailed for other crimes, but never connected? Or did an ancient curse fulfill its needs? I want to thank you for joining us here tonight on the Dark Zone, WCAK 1124 AM, for this chilling and informative account of Jack the Ripper. If you missed the premiere episode of Conspiracy, Coincidence, or Cover-Up on the Doppelgangers, that is a must listen. Go back, you will not be disappointed. Until next time, good night, America.